The road is a lonely place, but it's a loneliness you get used to. It becomes a kind of companion, a low, steady hum beneath the rumble of the engine. For 20 years, I've been driving long haul, and I've seen my share of strange things. Deer with eyes that glowed a little too brightly. Weird fogs that rolled in on clear nights. The kind of exhaustion that makes the white lines on the asphalt start to dance. But I'd never seen anything I couldn't eventually explain away, not until that night on Alabama Highway 5. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of night where the air has a bite to it that promises a cold winter. I was behind schedule, pushing my rig a little harder than I should have been. My dispatcher, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, had been on my case about a delivery in Mobile. The load was nothing special, just machine parts, but the client was apparently the impatient type. The pressure was on, and the darkness outside the cab felt like it was pressing in, thick and heavy. Highway 5 isn't like the interstate. It's a 2-lane blacktop that winds through some of the most desolate parts of the state. The trees crowd the edges of the road, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for your truck as you pass. There are no streetlights, no friendly glows from distant towns. There's just you, your headlights, and miles of unforgiving darkness. I had my radio on, tuned to some late-night talk show where people called in with their problems. The drone of voices was a comfort, a flimsy shield against the oppressive silence. I was about an hour south of Brent when my headlights caught her. She was standing on the shoulder just past a bend in the road. A young woman, maybe early 20s, wearing a simple light-colored dress that seemed entirely wrong for the chilly night. She wasn't holding a sign, wasn't sticking out her thumb. She was just standing there, her hands clasped in front of her, watching my truck approach with a stillness that was deeply unsettling. Every rule in the trucker's handbook, written or unwritten, screams at you not to pick up hitchhikers. It's a recipe for disaster. You hear stories, robberies, hijackings, or worse. My mind was flashing through all of them as I got closer, but there was something about her. She looked lost, helpless, the kind of person you'd feel guilty about leaving stranded in the middle of nowhere on a cold night. My foot eased off the accelerator, the big diesel engine groaning in protest. Just see what she needs, I told myself. Maybe her car broke down. I can call for a tow. I pulled the rig onto the gravel, shoulder. The air brakes hissing like a nest of angry snakes. The cloud of dust my tires kicked up swirled around her, but she didn't flinch. I rolled down the passenger window, the cold air rushing in and chasing away the cab's stale warmth. "You all right out here, miss?" I called out. She walked toward the truck, her movements graceful but slow, almost hesitant. As she got closer, I could see her more clearly in the glow of the dashboard lights. She was pale, with large dark eyes that seemed to swallow the light. Her hair was long and dark, clinging to her face in damp strands. She looked like she'd been caught in a rainstorm, even though the sky was clear. "My car. It went off the road back there," she said. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper above the idling engine. "I need to get to my parents' house. It's just a few miles up the road in Oak Haven." I knew Oak Haven. It wasn't really a town, more of a crossroads with a few old houses. It was on my way. The sensible part of my brain was still screaming at me to just call the highway patrol and move on. But looking at her shivering in that thin dress, I couldn't do it. My conscience, or maybe just my foolishness, won out. "All right, get in," I said, pushing open the passenger door. "But I'm on a schedule, so I can only take you as far as the turnoff." "That's all I need," she whispered, climbing into the cab. "Thank you." She settled into the passenger seat, pulling the door shut with a soft click. A strange chill filled the cab, a damp cold that seemed to radiate from her. I could smell it too, a faint earthy scent like river mud and wet leaves. I chalked it up to her having been outside for a while. I pulled the truck back onto the highway, the gears grinding as I got up to speed. I tried to make small talk, the way you do to fill an awkward silence. "So, what's your name?" I asked. "Anna," she said, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. "I'm Frank." "Nasty night to be stranded. Did you hit a deer?" She didn't answer right away. She just kept staring forward, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she hadn't heard me. "Something like that," she finally said, her voice so quiet I almost missed it. The conversation died after that. I tried a few more times, asking about her family, what she was doing out so late, but her answers were short and vague. She seemed to be fading into the background, a silent presence in the seat next to me. The only thing that reminded me she was real was the persistent damp chill that clung to the air. I turned up the heat, but it didn't seem to make a difference. The miles rolled by in an uncomfortable silence. The talk show on the radio had ended, replaced by the crackle of static. I felt a growing sense of unease, the kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up. I glanced over at her. She was perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Her skin looked almost translucent under the green glow of the dash. Finally, I saw the sign for Oak Haven. It was an old, faded wooden sign, barely legible in my headlights. "Here's your turnoff," I said, my voice sounding louder than I intended. "Which house is it?" She pointed a slender, pale finger toward a narrow dirt lane that branched off the main road. "Down there." The White House with the big porch. I slowed the truck and made the turn, the rig bumping and swaying on the unpaved road. About 100 yards in, a house came into view. It was an old farmhouse, a little run down but with a light on in one of the downstairs windows. It looked exactly as she'd described. I pulled to a stop in front of the walkway. "Well, here you are." Safe and sound, I turned to her, a half smile on my face, ready to offer a final "take care." But she was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. I would have heard it, seen the dome light come on. She had simply vanished. I stared at the empty space, my heart pounding against my ribs. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Had I imagined her? Was I that tired? Had she slipped out so quietly I hadn't noticed? Impossible. Then I saw it. On the leather of the passenger seat there was a dark, damp patch right where she had been sitting. It was the exact shape of a person. I reached out a trembling hand and touched it. The seat was cold, unnaturally so, and my fingers came away wet. The air was thick with that same smell of river water and decay. I sat there for a full minute, maybe longer, my mind refusing to process what had just happened. The light in the farmhouse window was a warm, inviting beacon in the terrifying darkness. I needed to know. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't going crazy. I killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening. With my heart in my throat, I climbed out of the cab and walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door. The house was old, the white paint peeling. I could hear the faint sound of a television inside. I raised my hand and knocked, the sound echoing in the still night. After a moment, the door creaked open. An old woman stood there, her face a road map of wrinkles, her eyes kind but weary. She was holding a robe closed at her throat. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice frail. I didn't know what to say. How do you ask someone if they're missing a ghost? I'm sorry to bother you so late," I stammered. "I'm a trucker. I just gave a young woman a ride. She said she lived here. Her name was Anna." The old woman's expression didn't change. There was no surprise, no confusion. Just a deep, profound sadness that seemed to settle over her like a shroud. "You saw her on Highway 5, didn't you?" she said, her voice heavy with resignation. "Wearing a white dress." I could only nod, my throat suddenly tight. She sighed, a long, tired sound. "You're the third driver this year." Anna, she was our daughter. 50 years ago, on her way home from a dance, a drunk driver ran her off the road. Her car went into the river just a few miles from here. They found her the next day. She looked past me, her gaze fixed on the dark highway beyond the trees. Every now and then, when the night gets cold, she tries to come home. She finds a ride with a kind stranger. She just wants to get back to her house. The old woman's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of pity in them. "Thank you for bringing our Anna home again." She gently closed the door, leaving me standing alone on the porch, the cold night air seeping into my bones. I walked back to my truck in a daze. The damp spot was still on the seat. A chilling physical proof of the impossible. I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight through to Mobile. The image of Anna's pale face and the old woman's sad eyes burned into my mind. I don't take Highway 5 anymore. If a dispatch tries to send me that way, I refuse. Let them fire me. Some roads hold memories, and some memories are too heavy to carry. I know what's out there in the Alabama darkness waiting on the side of the road. She's just trying to get home, and I'm afraid that one night she might decide to stay. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like this video. And now, let's begin our next terrifying tale. There are bridges you cross without a second thought, concrete and steel structures that are just another part of the job. And then there are bridges that have a personality, a history you can feel in the vibration of the road. The bridges over the Black Warrior River, especially the older ones near Tuscaloosa, are the second kind. They're heavy with a humid, watchful air, and at night they feel like a gateway to somewhere else. I've been driving over them for 15 years, and I've learned to hold my breath a little tighter every time I do. This happened on a run from Jasper down to Demopolis. It was late, probably around 2 a.m., and the world had shrunk to the twin beams of my headlights. The air was thick with that soupy Alabama humidity that clings to everything. A low-lying fog was starting to creep up from the riverbanks, blurring the edges of the road and making the darkness feel solid. I was on the Foster's Ferry Bridge, an old, narrow truss bridge that groans under the weight of a fully loaded rig. It's not a place you want to linger. The river below is wide and dark, its surface like polished black glass. They call it the Black Warrior for a reason. It's a powerful, moody river that has claimed its share of lives. As my truck rumbled onto the bridge, I felt that familiar prickle of unease. It's a feeling a lot of us drivers get on this stretch, a sense that you're being watched. I kept my eyes glued to the road, my hands tight on the wheel. The fog was getting thicker, swirling in hypnotic patterns in my headlights. That's when I saw the first one. It was a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision on the pedestrian walkway to my right. I glanced over and saw a shape, a dark, human-like silhouette, standing on the railing. Before my brain could even process what I was seeing, it leaped. It didn't fall or stumble. It launched itself into the air, a graceful, silent arc that ended in the black water below. There was no splash, no sound at all. Just the shape, and then nothing. My heart hammered against my chest. Did I just see someone jump? My first instinct was to slam on the brakes to call 911. But I was in the middle of a narrow bridge with a 40-ton truck. Stopping suddenly was a dangerous move. As I wrestled with what to do, my headlights caught another movement, this time on the left side of the bridge, another silhouette. It was perched on the railing just like the first one, and just as I passed, it jumped too, disappearing into the darkness without a sound. Panic started to set in, cold and sharp. This wasn't right. I was halfway across the bridge now, the steel structure groaning around me. I looked ahead, my eyes scanning the fog-drenched road, and I saw more of them. There were at least a dozen shapes scattered across the rest of the bridge. Some were standing on the railings poised to jump. Others were just standing in the walkway, their forms indistinct and blurry like smudges of charcoal against the gray fog. They were all completely black, featureless voids in the shape of people. Then I noticed something else, something that turned my panic into pure mind-numbing terror. They weren't just human-shaped, they were wrong. Their limbs were too long, their bodies unnaturally thin. They moved with a jerky, twitching motion like a film reel with missing frames. As I got closer to one of them, it turned its head to look at my truck, and the movement was sharp and insect-like, a sickening snap of a neck that shouldn't be able to move that way. It had no face, just a smooth, dark surface where features should have been. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. My foot was pressed to the floor, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I was a captive audience to their horrifying, silent ballet. As I passed each one, it would either jump or simply fade. It would be there 1 second, a solid black shape against the fog, and the next it would dissolve into wisps of shadow. One of them was standing almost in my lane. I swerved instinctively, the truck's horn blaring a desperate, useless warning. The shape didn't move. My rig passed right through it. I felt a sudden, bone-deep cold sweep through the cab, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It felt like death itself had brushed against me. The radio, which had been playing a country station, erupted in a burst of static so loud it made me flinch. I finally reached the end of the bridge, my tires hitting solid ground with a jolt. I didn't dare look in my rearview mirror. I just kept driving, my eyes wide, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I drove for another 10 miles before I could trust my hands enough to pull over. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking. I leaned against the side of my truck, gulping in the humid night air. I looked back in the direction of the bridge. It was just a faint outline in the distance, shrouded in fog. The world was silent again, except for the chirping of crickets and the pounding of my own blood in my ears. I eventually got back in the truck and called another driver I knew, a guy named Dave who'd been running these routes even longer than I had. I didn't tell him what I saw, not directly. I just asked him if he'd ever felt weird crossing the Foster's Ferry Bridge at night. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "The shadows, you mean?" he finally said, his voice low. "Yeah, I've seen them." "So have a lot of guys. Don't stop, Frank. Whatever you do, don't ever stop on that bridge. They say they're the spirits of all the people who've gone into that river. The slaves from the old ferry days, the car wrecks, the suicides, they're trapped there, and they're always looking for company." He told me a story about a rookie driver who thought he saw someone jump and stopped his truck mid-bridge to help. When the highway patrol found his rig the next morning, it was empty. The engine was still running, the driver's door wide open. They never found him. They just assumed he'd fallen into the river, but the old-timers, they say the shadows got him. I never found out what those things were. Ghosts? Demons, figments of a tired mind? I don't know. But I know they were real. I know the cold that went through my cab was real. Now, when I have to cross the Black Warrior River, I do it during the day if I can. If I have to cross it at night, I turn my music up loud, I keep my eyes locked on the far side of the bridge, and I drive as fast as I can. I don't look to the sides. I don't want to see them. I don't want to see those tall, thin shadows moving in the fog, leaping silently into the black water, waiting for the next truck to pass. Interstate 65 is the backbone of Alabama, a long, straight shot that connects the industrial north with the sunny Gulf Coast. You can spend hours on it watching the landscape change from rolling hills to flat pine forests. It's a modern, well-maintained highway, the kind of road that should feel safe. But there's a stretch of it somewhere between Montgomery and Mobile that holds a particularly nasty secret. It's a place where the past isn't just remembered, it's replayed. I was on a southbound run, hauling a refrigerated trailer full of produce. It was one of those perfect driving nights, clear sky, a bright moon, and very little traffic. The hum of the reefer unit was a constant companion, a reminder of the perishable cargo I was carrying. I was making good time, feeling relaxed, my mind on the breakfast I was going to have when I reached the coast. I was cruising along at a steady 70 miles per hour when I saw it. Up ahead, maybe a mile or two down the road, there was a bright, angry orange glow against the dark horizon. My first thought was a brush fire, but the light was too concentrated, too fierce. As I got closer, the shape became clear and a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. It was a semi-truck, pulled over on the shoulder, and it was completely engulfed in flames. The fire was horrific. Flames were leaping 50 feet into the air, black smoke billowing into the night sky. The heat was so intense I could feel it through my windshield even from half a mile away. I've seen truck fires before, and they are one of the worst things you can witness on the road. A driver's whole life, their rig, their cargo, their home, can be gone in minutes. And sometimes the driver is gone with it. My training kicked in. I grabbed my CB radio. Breaker 19, southbound on I-65, about mile marker 80. I've got a truck fire on the shoulder, a big one. Somebody call 911. A couple of other drivers immediately responded, their voices a mix of shock and concern. One of them confirmed he was on the phone with emergency services. I slowed my rig down, preparing to pass. The protocol is to give a wide berth, as tires can explode and send shrapnel flying. The closer I got, the more surreal the scene became. The burning truck was a twisted skeleton of metal, the trailer peeled open like a tin can. The flames danced and writhed, painting the surrounding trees in a hellish, flickering light. The roar of the fire was a deafening beast. I scanned the area, looking for the driver, praying I'd see someone standing a safe distance away, watching their livelihood turn to ash. I saw no one. My heart sank. Oh God, I hope they got out. I was almost alongside the wreck now. The heat was incredible, a physical wave that washed over my cab, the smell of burning rubber, diesel, and something else, something acrid and chemical, filled the air. I kept my eyes on the road, navigating past the inferno, and then something impossible happened. As I was directly parallel to the burning truck, it flickered. It wasn't a flicker from the flames, the entire truck, the fire, the smoke, the twisted metal. It wavered for a second like a bad TV signal. I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I looked again. The burning rig was still there, roaring and consuming itself. I shook my head, blaming the heat haze and the long hours. I passed the wreck and started to pull away, my eyes glued to my passenger side mirror. I watched the fire recede into the distance. It was still burning brightly, a malevolent orange star in my mirror. I kept watching, unable to look away. And then it happened again. The fire flickered more violently this time. For a split second it vanished completely, leaving only the dark, empty shoulder illuminated by my own taillights. Then it was back, as bright as ever. What the hell? I kept driving, my mind reeling. I was about a mile past it when I looked in the mirror again. The fire was gone, not dying down, not smoldering, it was just gone. The orange glow had vanished from the horizon. The pillar of black smoke was no longer there. It was as if the entire event had been erased from existence. I grabbed the CB again, my hand shaking. Breaker, that southbound truck fire at mile marker 80. Anyone still got eyes on it? I'm past it now, and I can't see it in my mirror anymore. The radio crackled. It was the driver who had called 911. His voice was shaky. Negative, driver. I'm about a mile behind you. I passed the spot you called out. There's nothing here. No fire, no wreck, no scorch marks, nothing. I thought I was going crazy. Another voice came on, an older, gravelly-sounding driver. "You ain't crazy, son. You just saw the ghost rig, been running this stretch of 65 for 30 years. See it 2-3 times a year." My blood ran cold. "Ghost rig?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir," the old-timer replied. "Back in the late 80s, a fella named Charlie was hauling a tanker full of industrial solvents. Had a blowout right around that spot. Lost control, rig went over and exploded. Worst fire I ever saw. Charlie, he never made it out. They say he's still trying to finish his run. Every now and then he just relives it. The fire, the whole thing, a new, terrifying detail clicked into place. The acrid chemical smell I had noticed. It wasn't just burning diesel. The old-timer wasn't finished. Some fellas say if you're listening to your CB when you pass him, you can hear him. They say he's still trying to call for help. As he said that, a faint sound came through my radio buried beneath the static. It was a voice, panicked and full of static, breaking up and fading in and out. It was almost unintelligible, but I could make out a few words repeated over and over. "On fire, can't get out, I'm on fire." I slammed my hand down on the radio, shutting it off. The silence in the cab was absolute, terrifying. I was breathing heavily, my whole body trembling. I had seen it, I had smelled it, and I had heard it. I drove the rest of the way to Mobile in a state of shock. Every flicker of a distant light, every shadow on the side of the road made me jump. When I finally delivered my load and shut down my truck for the day, I just sat in the driver's seat for an hour, watching the sun come up, trying to convince myself that what I saw wasn't real. But it was. I know it was. There's a ghost on I-65, a ghost made of fire and smoke and desperation. He's trapped in the worst moment of his life, forced to burn to death over and over again on a lonely stretch of highway. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, he'll let you watch. If this story gave you chills, smash the like button and drop a comment below. Another horrifying tale is waiting. Let's continue. Every trucker has their favorite spots to pull over for a mandatory break, and their least favorite, the rest areas near the Talladega National Forest, fall squarely into the latter category for me. During the day, it's beautiful country, dense woods, rolling hills, the kind of place you see on postcards. But at night, that beauty transforms into something else. The woods become a solid wall of black, and the silence is so deep it feels like it's listening. I was on a tight schedule as usual, hauling a load of lumber from Georgia to Mississippi. The hours were catching up to me, and my logbook was screaming that I needed to take an 8-hour break. I saw a sign for a scenic overlook and rest area just off the highway bordering the national forest. It wasn't an official, brightly lit service plaza, just a paved loop with a few parking spots for trucks and a concrete picnic table. It was empty, which I usually prefer. That night, the emptiness felt wrong. I pulled my rig into a spot at the far end of the loop, the one closest to the tree line. The forest was right there, maybe 20 feet from my passenger door. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was jarring. The only sound was the faint ticking of the cooling engine and the distant hum of the highway. I made a quick dinner in my cab, checked my messages, and then crawled into the sleeper berth, pulling the thick curtain closed. Sleep, however, refused to come. I tossed and turned, the silence of the woods feeling more oppressive than the noise of a busy truck stop. It was a heavy, watchful quiet. After about an hour of staring at the dark ceiling of my bunk, I started to hear it. At first it was just a whisper, so faint I thought it was the wind in the trees or the rustling of some animal. It was a low, murmuring sound, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound grew slightly louder, and I realized it wasn't one voice, but many. They were speaking in a rhythmic, chanting tone, and it wasn't English. It was a language I had never heard before, guttural and strange, full of clicks and harsh consonants. The voices were coming from the woods, from the darkness just beyond my truck. A cold knot of fear tightened in my gut. My first thought was a group of people, maybe some cult or local oddballs having a late-night gathering in the forest. It was a rational explanation, but it wasn't a comforting one. I was alone, isolated, and there were unknown people chanting in a strange language just feet from where I was trying to sleep. I lay perfectly still, my ears tuned to the darkness. The chanting grew louder, closer. It sounded like the group was moving, and they were moving toward my truck. I could hear the soft crunch of leaves underfoot, the snap of a twig. The voices were no longer just in front of the truck. They were all around it. It felt like they were circling me, their strange, rhythmic whispers enveloping the cab in a web of sound. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was paralyzed by a primal fear, the kind that tells you not to move, not to make a sound lest the predator outside hears you. I wanted to look, to peek through the curtain and see who or what was out there, but I was too terrified. My imagination was running wild, conjuring images of cloaked figures with malevolent intentions. The whispers grew more intense, more urgent. It no longer sounded like a chant. It sounded like they were arguing, their voices rising and falling in a heated alien debate. Then I heard a soft thump against the side of my trailer. And another. And another. It sounded like they were throwing small stones or clumps of dirt at my rig. That was it. My flight or fight response finally kicked in, and flight won by a landslide. I scrambled out of the bunk and into the driver's seat, my hands fumbling for the keys. The whispers seemed to crescendo as they heard me move, a chorus of angry, guttural sounds. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life, its familiar thunder a welcome shield against the terrifying whispers. The headlights flashed on, cutting a brilliant path into the darkness and illuminating the tree line. What I saw made my blood run cold. The woods were empty. There was no one there, no cultists, no cloaked figures, nothing. Just the dense, silent trees. But that wasn't the horrifying part. All over the trunks of the trees at the edge of the forest, the ones directly in front of my truck, were dozens of symbols. They were drawn in what looked like white chalk or paint, crude, spidery symbols I had never seen before. Spirals, jagged lines, eye-like shapes. They hadn't been there when I pulled in. I would have noticed. It was as if the voices themselves had left a physical mark. I didn't wait to examine them. I slammed the truck into gear, the tires squealing on the pavement as I wrenched the wheel and tore out of that rest area. I didn't care about my logbook or the mandatory brake. I just drove, my eyes wide with terror. The image of those strange symbols burned into my mind. I drove for 2 hours straight until the sun started to rise and the sky turned from black to a soft, forgiving gray. I finally pulled into a brightly lit, bustling truck stop, surrounded by the comforting noise and motion of other drivers. I felt safe, but the fear lingered. I've asked other drivers about that rest area near Talladega. A few have told me they avoid it, that it has a bad feeling. One old-timer told me that part of the forest has old legends attached to it, stories from the Creek tribe about stick-like spirits that whisper on the wind and lead travelers astray. He said they were territorial, and they didn't like visitors at night. I don't know what I heard that night. I don't know what left those symbols on the trees, but I know I was not alone. The silence of the Talladega National Forest isn't empty. It's full of voices, and if you're unlucky enough to stop and listen, you might just hear them. In this line of work, you learn to appreciate the small oases of civilization you find along the endless miles of highway. A good rest stop can be a godsend, a place to stretch your legs, grab a hot cup of coffee, and feel human again for a few minutes. You get to know the good ones, the ones with clean bathrooms and friendly staff. But the one I found one night in the forgotten plains of central Alabama wasn't on any map. And when I went back to look for it, it wasn't there at all. It was a grueling run, a cross-country trip from California to Florida. By the time I hit Alabama, I was running on fumes, both literally and figuratively. My body ached, my eyes burned, and my mind was a fuzzy, exhausted mess. It was that dangerous kind of tired where you start to nod off for a split second, your head jerking back up with a jolt of adrenaline. I knew I had to pull over. I was on a state highway, a 2-lane road that cut through miles of dark farmland. There were no towns, no lights, just the occasional lonely farmhouse set far back from the road. I was starting to despair, thinking I'd have to just pull over on the shoulder when I saw it. Up ahead, a dim, flickering neon sign cut through the darkness. It read, "Eat and Gas. Open 24 hours. It was a small independent rest stop, the kind you don't see much anymore. It looked like it was straight out of the 1970s, a low, flat-roofed building with a single gas pump out front and a large gravel lot. It wasn't much, but it was an island of light in an ocean of black. A wave of relief washed over me. I pulled my rig into the lot, the gravel crunching under my tires. There were no other cars or trucks, which was a little strange, but I was too tired to care. I just wanted coffee. I shut down the engine and climbed out, the night air cool and still. The place was eerily quiet. The only sound was the buzzing of the old neon sign. I pushed open the glass door to the small convenience store and diner. A little bell chimed overhead. The inside was just as dated as the outside. It had linoleum floors, a long formica counter with worn vinyl stools, and shelves stocked with a sparse selection of snacks and supplies. The air smelled of stale coffee and dust. Behind the counter stood a man. He was tall and thin, with slicked back gray hair and a gaunt, pale face. He wore a crisp white shirt and a black bow tie like a waiter from a bygone era. He didn't smile or greet me. He just watched me with dark, empty eyes as I walked in. "Just need some coffee," I said, my voice sounding loud in the silence. He nodded slowly and turned to a large industrial coffee pot that looked like it had been brewing the same batch for a week. He picked up a thick ceramic mug from under the counter and filled it, his movements slow and deliberate. He slid it across the counter to me without a word. The silence was starting to get to me. It was an unnatural, heavy silence. There was no radio playing, no hum from a refrigerator, nothing. "And I need to use the restroom," I added, trying to break the quiet. He gestured with his chin toward a door at the back of the store marked restrooms. I walked back, my boots echoing on the floor. The restroom was clean but old, with cracked tiles and a faucet that dripped with a steady rhythmic plink. I splashed some cold water on my face, trying to wake myself up. The face staring back at me in the mirror looked haggard. I felt a strange sense of dislocation, as if I had stepped into a place that was out of sync with the rest of the world. When I came back out, the attendant was in the exact same position, standing motionless behind the counter. I walked up and put a $5 bill on the counter for the coffee. "How much do I owe you?" I asked. He just looked at the money, then back at me. He pushed the bill back toward me. "On the house," he said. His voice was a dry, raspy whisper like the rustling of dead leaves. It was the first time he had spoken more than a single word. "Oh, well, thanks," I said, a little taken aback. I picked up the coffee mug. It was heavy and warm in my hands. "Appreciate it." He just gave another slow nod. I felt an overwhelming urge to get out of there. The silence, the attendant's strange demeanor, the feeling of being in a place frozen in time. It was all deeply unsettling. I gave a quick, awkward wave and backed out of the door, the little bell chiming my exit. The cold night air was a relief after the stuffy, dead atmosphere of the store. I walked back to my truck, the heavy ceramic mug warm in my hands. I climbed into the cab, placed the coffee in the cup holder, and fired up the engine. The familiar roar was a comfort, a piece of the real world in this strange, silent place. As I pulled out of the gravel lot and back onto the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The rest stop was still there, its lonely neon sign buzzing in the darkness. I drove on, taking a sip of the coffee. It was black, bitter, and incredibly strong, exactly what I needed. It jolted me awake, clearing the fog from my brain. I drove for another hour, the caffeine doing its work. The sun began to hint at its arrival, the eastern sky turning from inky black to a deep, bruised purple. I felt more alert, more myself. The memory of the strange rest stop started to feel like a dream, a hallucination brought on by extreme fatigue. The silent attendant, the free coffee, the eerie quiet. It was all just a product of an overtired mind, right? The next day, I was talking on the phone with another driver, a buddy named Rick who ran a similar route. I wanted to tell him about the weird little place, maybe get a laugh out of it. "Hey, you ever run that stretch of 97 through the middle of nowhere?" I asked. "I found the weirdest little rest stop last night. Looked like it was straight out of a time capsule, Highway 97. "Yeah, I know it. There's nothing out there, man, just cotton fields and cows," he said. "What mile marker were you at?" "I don't know, I wasn't paying attention," I admitted. "But you can't miss it. It's the only thing for 50 miles. Old building, gravel lot, flickering sign that says Eaton Gas." There was a pause on Rick's end. "Buddy, I've been driving that road for 10 years. There is no rest stop on Highway 97, not one." "You must have been dreaming." "No, I wasn't dreaming," I insisted, a little annoyed. I stopped, I went inside, I got a coffee. It was real. To prove my point, I decided to look it up. I pulled over at the next major truck stop, got out my laptop, and started searching. I scoured online maps, satellite images, and trucker forums. Nothing. The stretch of highway I had been on was exactly as Rick described, a barren, empty blacktop. There was no rest stop, no diner, no gas station, no sign of any building, let alone a functioning business. There wasn't even an abandoned lot or a crumbling foundation where one might have been. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. It was impossible. I had been there. I had felt the cold tile of the restroom floor, the weight of the mug in my hand. The mug. My eyes darted to the cup holder in my cab. I had been so focused on my search that I had forgotten about it. I reached over and picked it up. It was still there. A solid physical piece of evidence. I wasn't crazy. I turned the mug over in my hands, looking for some kind of identifying mark. On the bottom, printed in faded green letters, was a logo. It was a stylized eagle over a mountain range with a name underneath. Summit Diners Incorporated. My hands were trembling as I typed the name into the search engine. The results came up instantly. Summit Diners Incorporated was a chain of roadside diners and rest stops that had been popular in the American South. The articles were all historical, talking about the company's rise in the 1950s and its eventual decline. The company had filed for bankruptcy and shuttered its last location in 1978. I stared at the screen, then at the mug in my hand. A mug from a company that hadn't existed for nearly 50 years. A mug given to me by a silent man in a place that wasn't there. I had driven into a pocket of time, a ghost of a place that refused to fade away completely. The coffee I had drunk, the coffee that had jolted me back to reality, was from a pot that had been brewed decades ago. I threw the mug out at that truck stop. I hurled it into a dumpster with all my might, as if getting rid of it could erase the memory. But it didn't work. I can still feel the weight of it in my hand. I can still see the attendant's blank, hollow eyes. And now, when I'm driving late at night and I see a dim light promising rest up ahead, I don't feel relief. I feel a deep, chilling fear. I press my foot on the accelerator and drive a little faster, terrified that if I stop, I might not be able to leave. They call Highway 431 in Alabama the highway to hell, and for good reason. It's consistently ranked one of the most dangerous roads in America. It's a mess of narrow lanes, blind hills, and curves so sharp they feel like they're trying to throw you off the road. But there's one particular bend, a nasty hairpin turned somewhere south of Eufaula, that has a reputation all its own. The locals call it Dead Man's Curve, and it's not just because of the number of accidents. It's because of what you might see there in the dead of night. I drew the short straw on a delivery of poultry from Albertville down to Dothan, which meant I had to run the gauntlet of 431 at night. I hate that road. Every mile feels like a gamble. You're constantly on high alert, your hands gripping the wheel, your eyes scanning for oncoming traffic drifting over the center line. It's exhausting. It was well after midnight when I approached the infamous curve. The night was moonless, and the woods on either side of the road were so thick they seemed to swallow the beams of my headlights. I had my high beams on, trying to pierce the oppressive darkness. I knew the curve was coming up, and I had already started to slow down, gearing down the engine to let it help with the braking. As I eased into the turn, my headlights swept across the asphalt. And that's when I saw them. 2 points of light low to the ground, right in the middle of my lane. They were a brilliant fiery red like the glowing ends of 2 cigars. My first thought was an animal, a deer, a coyote, maybe a large raccoon. I've seen thousands of them, their eyes reflecting back in the dark. But this was different. Animal eyes reflect light. They don't generate it. These 2 red dots were glowing with their own internal luminescence, a steady, malevolent intensity that didn't waver. And they were perfectly still, waiting for me. I hit the horn, a long, loud blast that echoed through the silent woods. The eyes didn't move. I was getting closer, too close. I had a split-second decision to make, hit whatever it was or swerve. On this curve, swerving was suicide. There was no shoulder, just a steep wooded embankment that dropped off into blackness. My instincts screamed at me. I stomped on the brakes, the air brakes hissing furiously, the tires screeching in protest. The whole rig shuddered, the trailer threatening to jackknife. I wrestled with the wheel, trying to keep the truck in my lane while bleeding off as much speed as possible. Just as I thought I was about to make impact, the red eyes blinked. And then they moved. They shot upwards, rising from the ground with impossible speed. In the space of a heartbeat, they went from being a foot off the pavement to being 6 feet in the air. They were no longer the eyes of an animal. They were at the height of a man. I finally managed to bring the truck to a shuddering halt, my front bumper just feet from where the eyes had been. The cab was filled with the smell of hot brakes and burnt rubber. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. I stared through the windshield into the empty darkness, my high beams cutting a sterile path through the trees. There was nothing there. I sat there for a long moment, my breath fogging up the glass. My mind was scrambling to make sense of it. What the hell had I just seen? The logical part of my brain was trying to offer explanations. A drone with red LEDs, a prankster with a flashlight. But none of it felt right. The way those lights had moved, the way they had risen up, it was unnatural. Shaken, I put the truck back in gear and slowly, carefully pulled away. My eyes kept darting to my mirrors, half expecting to see something chasing me. As I rounded the rest of the curve, I glanced at my passenger side mirror, and I saw him. For just a second, illuminated by my own taillights, a figure was standing on the edge of the road right where I had stopped. It was a tall, slender man, but his form was hazy, indistinct like a heat shimmer on a summer road. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark shape, but I could see the two glowing red eyes fixed on my truck watching me drive away. A wave of pure terror washed over me. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I floored it. I drove away from that curve as fast as my rig could go, not daring to look in the mirror again. When I got to the truck stop in Dothan a couple of hours later, I was still trembling. I went inside and ordered a coffee, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the cup. An old-timer sitting at the counter, a guy with a weathered face and a faded trucker cap, must have seen the look on my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son," he said, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. "I think I might have," I replied, and I told him what happened on Dead Man's Curve. He just nodded slowly, taking a long sip of his coffee. He wasn't surprised. "You saw the rider," he said. "Been haunting that curve for decades. Story goes he was a young fella back in the 60s, a real speed demon on a motorcycle. He was taking that curve way too fast one night, lost control, and went head-on into a logging truck. Killed him instantly." The old-timer leaned in a little closer. "They say he's still there, still trying to race. Those red eyes you saw? That was his taillight. He's always looking for someone to challenge. The legend says if you see him, you're supposed to punch it. Don't slow down, don't stop. You just accelerate and don't look back. If you show fear, if you break, he thinks you're accepting his challenge. And nobody wins a race against the rider." His words sent a fresh chill down my spine. I had stopped. I had slammed on my brakes. I had accepted the challenge without even knowing it. I looked out the window at my truck parked under the bright lights of the lot, and I felt like it was a shield that had barely protected me. I finished my route, but the memory of those red eyes stayed with me. I've managed to avoid Highway 431 ever since. I'll take a detour that adds hours to my trip just to stay off that road, because I know what's waiting there on that dark and treacherous curve. A ghost with glowing red eyes standing in the middle of the road waiting for the next driver to challenge to a race you can only lose once. The area around Mobile Bay is a different world from the rest of Alabama. It's a place of water, mist, and long, high bridges that seem to float above the world. Driving over the Cochrane, Africa Town, USA Bridge at night, especially when the fog rolls in from the bay, is an experience. You're suspended high above the water, surrounded by a thick gray blanket with the lights of the city and the port glowing like distant constellations. It's beautiful, but it's also deeply isolating. You feel like you're the only person in the world. But some nights you find out you're not. I was hauling a container from the port of Mobile heading north. It was a late-night run, and the fog was as thick as I'd ever seen it. Visibility was down to maybe 100 feet. The towering supports of the bridge would appear out of the mist like the legs of some colossal beast, then vanish behind me. The fog muffled all sound, creating a strange, dreamlike silence. I was in the right lane, taking it slow and easy, my eyes straining to see the road ahead. That's when I saw the lights in my side mirror. They were faint at first, a pair of dim, yellowish headlights emerging from the fog behind me. They were moving at my speed, pacing me in the left lane. I wasn't surprised to see another vehicle. The port is a 24/7 operation. I figured it was another trucker. But as the vehicle pulled up alongside me, I realized something was wrong. It was a truck, but it wasn't a modern semi. It was an old military transport truck, the kind you see in black and white World War II movies. It was a drab olive green with a canvas cover over the back. It looked completely out of place on a modern bridge in the 21st century. My first thought was that it was a restored vehicle, maybe owned by a collector. But the truck was in terrible condition. It was covered in rust and grime. The canvas top was tattered, and the whole thing looked like it had been sitting at the bottom of a swamp for 50 years. And it was completely silent. I should have been able to hear the roar of its old engine even over the sound of my own. But there was nothing. It moved beside me with a ghostly quiet. As it kept pace with me, another set of headlights appeared out of the fog behind it. Another military truck, identical to the first, pulled up behind it in the left lane. And then another, and another. A whole convoy of these phantom trucks was materializing out of the fog, forming a silent procession alongside my rig. My curiosity turned to a cold, creeping dread. This wasn't a group of collectors, this was something else. The trucks were all identical, all in the same state of decay, all completely silent. They moved with a spooky, uniform precision. The lead truck was right next to my cab now. I risked a glance over, trying to see the driver. I wanted to see the face of the person behind the wheel of this ghost truck. I leaned over, peering through my passenger window into the cab of the other vehicle. The driver's seat was empty. My blood turned to ice. The cab was dark and hollow, but I could see the faint outline of the steering wheel against the gloom. And as I watched, my heart pounding in my throat, the steering wheel turned slightly, correcting its course on the bridge. It was moving on its own. I looked at the next truck in the convoy and the next. They were all the same, empty cabs, steering wheels turning with no hands to guide them. It was a ghost convoy, a spectral fleet sailing through the fog. I felt a primal urge to get away. I pressed down on the accelerator, my modern diesel engine roaring in protest as I tried to pull ahead of the lead truck. But the convoy matched my speed perfectly. I sped up, they sped up. I slowed down, they slowed down. They were tethered to me, a silent, ghostly escort. We drove like that for what felt like an eternity, my 21st century rig flanked by this procession from a forgotten war. The fear was so intense it was almost paralyzing. I was trapped high above the dark waters of the bay in the company of the dead. Then, as we neared the end of the bridge, the lead truck began to drift to the left. It didn't follow the curve of the road. It just maintained its straight course. I watched in horror as it drove directly toward the concrete barrier of the bridge. It didn't slow down. It didn't swerve. It passed right through the barrier as if it were made of smoke. For a split second, its form was visible on the other side, hanging in the empty air high above the bay. Then it simply faded, dissolving into the fog and disappearing. The truck behind it followed, and the one behind that, and the one behind that. One by one, the silent, driverless trucks veered off the bridge and vanished into the night, a ghostly parade plunging into a phantom sea. In a matter of seconds, they were all gone. I was alone again on the bridge, the fog and the silence rushing back in to fill the void they had left. I didn't stop until I was miles away, pulled over at a well-lit gas station, my hands shaking so hard I could barely turn off the ignition. I later learned that during World War II, Mobile was a major shipbuilding and supply hub. Thousands of tons of cargo and countless military vehicles were moved through the port, often under the cover of darkness. Accidents happened. Convoys got lost in the fog. Trucks went into the bay. I believe that's what I saw that night. A convoy that never reached its destination. A group of spectral soldiers still carrying out their orders, still driving their route, trapped in a loop of duty and death. They emerged from the fog, they crossed the bay, and they returned to the watery graves they found so many years ago. And for a few terrifying minutes, I was part of their formation. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like this video. And now, let's begin our next terrifying tale.